It was August 1882 in Aberdeen, Scotland. At the yard of Alexander Hall and Company, a brand new iron four-masted barque was ready to take the water. She was a masterpiece, designed by Alexander Duthie and built under the supervision of the famed Duthie Brothers. At the cost of £29,000, she measured 286 feet long, with a beam of 41 feet, and displaced over 2,200 tons. Her figurehead, a three-quarter female form, watched proudly over her prow. On the 3rd of August 1882, after a brief struggle stuck on the waves, she slid free at last. Her name, Port Jackson, a tribute to Sydney Harbour on the far side of the world and a clue to her intended trade, the London to Sydney wool run. From the very start, she was something special. Her first commander, Captain Robert Crombie, wasted no time showing off her speed. In that maiden voyage, she stormed into Sydney in just 77 days, the first four-masted ship ever to complete the run in under 80 days. Her best 24-hour run was a blistering 345 miles. And in another feat, she raced from Sydney to San Francisco in just 39 days, arriving only 3 days behind a steamship. For an iron sailing vessel, it was nothing short of astonishing. But speed was not her only story. The Port Jackson had her share of peril. In May 1893, while docked in Sydney, fire erupted deep in her hold. It was crammed with valuable cargo, all of which was almost completely destroyed by fire and water. When pumping stopped, there were some 12 to 14 feet of water in barque, and she was resting on bottom at the one end. Cause of fire not known, but seat of fire was amongst matches, tar, spirits, and other inflammable materials. By morning, the lower hold was gutted, cargo worth up to £60,000 destroyed, and several firemen overcome by smoke and nearly suffocated. Miraculously, the ship survived. By 1903, she was setting records again, this time as the largest wool carrier of her kind, hauling 12,145 bales of wool from Brisbane, the biggest single consignment ever loaded into a sailing vessel. But the golden age of sail was fading. By the early 1900s, steamships dominated the oceans. In 1906, salvation came in the form of Devitt Moore, a London firm who purchased her not for trade, but for training. She became part of the famous Brassey scheme, devised by Lord Brassey, preparing cadets for life in the Merchant Navy. With 100 boys from the stationary Thames training ship Wartime on board, she was promptly dispatched from London for Sydney around the world training cruise. Subsequently was employed in conjunction with another big four-poster, the Medway, ocean training ship for midshipmen, purchased in 1910. A large number of cadets who have been trained in one or other these fine barques have joined the Royal Naval Reserve or the Army. In May 1906, when off Beachy Head in the course of her initial cruise with Wartime boys, she was rammed by the German steamer Perilous and was cut down almost to the waterline. She was brought back to Thames and the necessary repairs were effected. One of her officers on that occasion was Mr. John K. Davis, well-known history for the part he played connection with Shackleton expedition in the Nimrod and later with Dr. Mawson's expedition in the Aurora. In October 1907, Port Jackson sailed from London with 24 naval cadets and 50 boys from Wartime. For the next 7 years, she became a floating school, regularly sailing between London and Sydney, carrying cadets, wool, and tallow. The cadets worked the sails, learned mathematics, navigation, and nautical astronomy. On board, they became seamen. In January 1910, the Port Jackson arrived in Sydney after a 111-day voyage carrying 37 cadets. Among her passengers were the elderly parents of artist Arthur Streeton, who, despite their age, relished the long passage. The ship became a familiar sight at Woolloomooloo Wharf, admired for her graceful lines and her mission to forge future officers of the sea. An interesting fact is that the sailors of the famous clipper ship Cutty Sark, the Captain Wilfred Dowman and his wife Catherine, who purchased and restored her, had met on a voyage from London to Sydney in 1912 on board the Port Jackson, on which Wilfred was first mate and Catherine was one of the 3 additional passengers. When World War I erupted in 1914, the Port Jackson was laid up at Grimsby, her cadet voyages over. But the war brought desperate shortages in shipping. The old barque was pressed back into cargo service, carrying grain across dangerous waters patrolled by German U-boats. Tragedy struck even before the end. In March 1916, during a stop in Port Adelaide, a 16-year-old cadet, Gordon Pitt, fell into a hold and was killed. And then came her final voyage. It was the 28th of April 1917. The Port Jackson was sailing from Buenos Aires to Cork Island with a cargo of maize. Some 180 miles west of Fastnet Rock of the Irish coast, she crossed paths with German U-boat U-67 under Captain Lieutenant Hans Nieland. Without warning, a torpedo slammed into the iron hull. The proud barque that had once outrun steamers and trained generations of sailors was doomed. 15 men were saved, but her master and 13 crew were lost. The Port Jackson slipped beneath the waves, ending 35 years of service. Today, she is remembered not only as a record-breaking clipper and a training ship for the Empire's merchant fleet, but also as one of the last great iron barques to fall victim in the First World War. As maritime historian Basil Lovelock once wrote, as a specimen of an iron ship of this era, the Port Jackson was hard to beat. She was always celebrated for her good looks, and her performances equaled them. From the wool runs of Sydney to cadet voyages across the globe, to her tragic end in the Irish Sea, the Port Jackson remains a legend of the age of sail.